The most dangerous moment in retirement is not when the market crashes. It's not inflation. It's not even the actual day your paycheck stops coming in. The most dangerous moment, and I've watched this happen over and over again, is the moment you tell everyone you retired before your retirement structure is actually ready for it. Because here's what happens the second people know. Life changes completely, and it changes fast. Trips start getting planned. Family starts calling because suddenly you have all this free time. Friends assume your calendar is wide open. You're spending shifts psychologically because it feels like the celebration phase is here. And before you know it, that quiet window, the one where you were supposed to make some of the most important financial decisions of your entire life, it just disappears, gone. I've literally watched people retire on a Friday, and by the following Monday, their calendar is already filling up for the next 2 months. That's how fast it moves. And once the external world has a claim on your time and attention, making large, thoughtful, structural financial decisions becomes genuinely harder. Not impossible, but harder. The mental space just isn't the same when everyone around you is celebrating and planning. That's honestly why I believe, and this might sound counterintuitive, that retirees should upgrade 10 things before they tell almost anyone they've retired. And I'm not talking about luxury upgrades. I'm not talking about buying a boat or redoing your kitchen. I'm talking about structural upgrades, the kind that quietly determine whether retirement feels organized and calm 15 or 20 years from now, or whether it feels financially stressful in ways that were completely avoidable.
That framing is interesting because most people think retirement starts with freedom. You're essentially saying it starts with systems.
Exactly. And that contrast matters a lot. For your entire working life, your financial life was built around one central engine, a paycheck. Money came in automatically every 2 weeks or every month. Taxes were mostly handled automatically through withholding. Healthcare was tied to your employer and came out of your paycheck before you even saw it. Saving decisions were relatively simple. You put money in, you picked your allocation, and the machine kept running. Then one day, that entire structure just disappears. And suddenly retirement becomes a completely different financial game. Now the questions shift entirely. Where does my income actually come from now? Which accounts should I be withdrawing from, and in what order?
How do I control taxes not just this year, but across the next 25 years? How do I make sure healthcare costs don't quietly eat the plan alive? What actually happens financially to a surviving spouse later?
Most people don't realize this going in, but retirement is less about stopping work and far more about rebuilding the entire operating system of your financial life from scratch. And the retirees who take those first months seriously, who handle these upgrades while the world still thinks they're working, they end up making calmer, smarter decisions for decades because the foundation underneath everything else is already solid. So let's get into it, starting with the first upgrade. Upgrade number one is your withdrawal strategy. And this is where retirement completely flips the financial equation in a way most people aren't prepared for. While you were working, the question was honestly pretty simple. How much can I save? Put as much away as you can, pick reasonable investments, repeat for 30 years. The accumulation phase has a kind of beautiful simplicity to it. More in is always better. The direction is clear. But the moment you retire, the question reverses entirely. Now it's, which account do I pull from? How much do I take? And in what order? And there's no obvious universal answer the way there was before. The right answer depends on your specific mix of accounts, your tax situation, your healthcare status, your Social Security timing, and a dozen other factors that interact with each other in ways most people have never had to think about. And the reason that shift matters so much is that retirement income isn't just income, it's tax positioning. Every single dollar you pull from a traditional IRA creates taxable income. That taxable income then affects your future tax brackets. It affects what you'll pay for Medicare premiums down the road. It affects how much of your Social Security ends up getting taxed. And once retirees establish bad withdrawal habits in the first year or two, those habits tend to just continue for decades.
So retirees aren't just withdrawing money. They're essentially setting the long-term tax rhythm for the rest of retirement.
That's exactly it. And that's the hidden piece most people miss entirely. Most retirees think, I'll just pull from the easiest account. And usually that's the traditional IRA because that's where the bulk of the money tends to sit. It's accessible, it feels obvious, but here's the thing, retirement accounts are not one giant pile of money. Each account type behaves completely differently. Traditional accounts get taxed as ordinary income when you withdraw. Roth accounts can come out tax-free if you've had them long enough. Brokerage accounts have their own capital gains treatment. Cash reserves are there for short-term needs. Each one carries different tax consequences depending on when and how you touch it. Retirees who understand this early on preserve significantly more flexibility later because those first few years of retirement are often the best opportunity you'll ever have to organize withdrawals intelligently. That's the window before required minimum distributions kick in and start forcing income whether you need it or not. Once those forced distributions begin, your flexibility starts shrinking fast. The people who do this right early almost always make better decisions for the next 30 years. The ones who just start pulling from wherever feels easiest, they usually don't even realize what they're giving up until it's long gone.
So this is really about being intentional early rather than reactive later.
Very much so. Because retirement problems, and I want to be clear about this, they usually don't come from one catastrophic mistake. They come from small inefficiencies that get repeated quietly year after year for 20 years. And poor withdrawal sequencing is one of the biggest and most invisible examples of that. Upgrade number 2 is your health insurance structure. And for a lot of retirees, this becomes one of the first genuinely jarring surprises after they leave work, especially for people who retire before 65, because the moment employment ends, employer health care typically disappears right along with it. And now you're suddenly in what I call the healthcare bridge years, which is the gap between when your employer coverage ends and when Medicare actually kicks in. And a lot of people wildly underestimate how strategic this period really is. Because planning healthcare and retirement isn't just about finding coverage. It's fundamentally about managing your income too.
Because the subsidies available through the marketplace depend directly on how much taxable income you show.
Right. And that's where your withdrawal strategy from Upgrade 1 and your healthcare strategy become deeply interconnected. This is why I keep saying retirement works best as one coordinated system rather than a bunch of isolated decisions you make separately. If you withdraw too aggressively from taxable accounts early on, your income can push above the thresholds where marketplace subsidies start disappearing. But with a carefully managed income structure, one that's been intentionally planned, retirees can potentially save meaningful amounts over those bridge years. We're not talking pocket change. For some people, this is tens of thousands of dollars. The mistake I see most often is people trying to solve the healthcare problem after retirement has already started. And decisions made under time pressure when you're already scrambling are almost always expensive decisions. The stress alone causes people to make emotional choices instead of structured ones. Retirees who solve this before their last day of work tend to feel significantly calmer in that first year because one of the largest financial unknowns in early retirement is already off the table. Upgrade number 3 is your retirement tax plan. And this is honestly where I see the most money quietly slipping away without retirees even realizing it. During your working years, taxes are relatively simple for most people. Income comes in, taxes get withheld. Maybe you maximize your 401k to lower the bill a little. Maybe you itemize if it makes sense. But the system kind of runs itself. Retirement changes all of that, because now you gain something that sounds great but is actually surprisingly dangerous, which is choice. Total discretionary control over your income. Now you're choosing which accounts to withdraw from, when to realize capital gains, whether to convert money into Roth accounts, when to turn on Social Security. And every single one of those decisions, individually and in combination, affects taxes.
So retirement tax planning stops being a one-year conversation and becomes multi-decade planning.
Exactly. And that mental shift is huge. The goal is no longer how do I minimize taxes this April? The goal becomes how do I minimize total lifetime tax friction across the next 25 or 30 years? Those are two completely different problems. And the early retirement years are especially important because they often create a planning window that most people don't even notice they have. Before Social Security fully activates, before required minimum distributions start forcing income, income during that period can temporarily be lower than it will be later, and that creates real opportunities for Roth conversions, strategic bracket management, and capital gains harvesting that simply won't exist once the income picture locks in. But if retirees ignore those early years because retirement suddenly feels busy, because the travel starts and the grandkids are visiting, that window closes quietly. And it usually doesn't come back. Taxes eventually touch almost every decision in retirement. The retirees who take this seriously early preserve far more flexibility. The ones who wait until April of their first retirement year and then say, oh, we probably should have done some things differently, they're already behind.
This is getting more and more interesting. What's the fourth upgrade we should absolutely prioritize before retirement?
The next upgrade is one that sounds almost too administrative to be important, but it quietly overrides almost everything else in your estate plan if it's been neglected. We're talking about your beneficiary designations. I say this gently, but this is one of the most consistently underestimated retirement mistakes I've ever come across. People assume their estate plan handles it. They have a will, maybe a trust, and they think those documents cover everything. But retirement accounts like IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, they follow the beneficiary form attached to the account itself, not the will, not necessarily even the trust. The actual form you filled out possibly years ago, possibly decades ago. And many retirees genuinely haven't looked at those forms since they opened the account. Sometimes it's been 15, 20 years. Life has completely changed, but the form hasn't.
So someone can have a perfectly written, carefully crafted estate plan and still have their retirement assets passed to completely the wrong person.
Absolutely. And it happens far more often than anyone wants to admit. Because these forms were usually completed at a very specific moment in life, maybe before a divorce, before a second marriage, before grandchildren were born, before retirement balances became as large as they are now. Life moved on. The account grew, but the form just sat there unchanged. Here's the part that makes this especially tricky. These mistakes are almost completely invisible until after someone passes away. Nobody gets a warning. Nobody gets a chance to fix it at that point. That's what makes beneficiary planning so important. It's about preventing future chaos quietly before anything happens while you still have full control. We had a situation where an account ended up passing to minor grandchildren because of an outdated designation. The tax outcome was significantly larger than it needed to be. It required court involvement, and it added complexity to an already painful time for that family. And the fix would have taken 20 minutes. 20 minutes. But we've also seen the opposite, someone who updated his designations just a few months before an unexpected passing. His accounts moved cleanly to the right people. No delay, no disputes, no unnecessary tax consequences. Completely different outcome from the same type of account, just based on one updated form. That's the power of this. It's one of the highest impact actions on this entire list, and it costs nothing except a little time. Upgrade number 5 is your estate documents. And retirement is one of the single most important moments to actually sit down and revisit these, because retirement changes the entire financial structure underneath your life. Most people created these documents years earlier, when kids were younger, when income looked different, when retirement balances were a fraction of what they are now. And the assumption a lot of retirees make is, well, we already have a will, so we're covered. But retirement planning is not about whether documents exist. It's about whether those documents still actually reflect your current reality.
So retirees are often running on old instructions that were designed for a completely different version of their financial life.
Exactly right. Healthcare directives written when you were 45 may not reflect what you want at 68. Power of attorney documents may name people whose circumstances have changed. Trust instructions may reference assets or structures that no longer exist the way they were written. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If something unexpected happens, decisions will still get made. The question is only whether those decisions happen according to your instructions or by default. And default decisions, the ones made by courts or by whoever has the strongest voice in the room, are rarely the ones you would have chosen. I do want to be honest about something, though. This is the upgrade that gets delayed most often, even by people who fully understand why it matters. Because estate planning feels emotionally uncomfortable. People associate it with aging, with mortality, so they keep putting it off. We'll do it next year, and next year becomes 5 years later. But retirement is actually the ideal time to tackle it because you're already restructuring everything else in your financial life anyway. And the retirees who push through and get it done usually describe the same thing afterward: relief, just genuine relief, because the uncertainty is gone. The people who need to make decisions are identified, the instructions are clear, and the structure is already in place before anything goes wrong. Upgrade number 6 is your insurance structure. And there's a really important shift in thinking that retirees need to make here. The insurance you carried during your working years was built around your working life. That's the whole point. Disability insurance existed to replace income if you couldn't work. Certain life insurance policies were protecting a family that depended on your paycheck. Employer-related coverage was solving a very specific set of problems. But retirement changes the risks you're actually protecting against. Now there's no earned income to replace. The household doesn't depend on a future paycheck. The insurance equation has fundamentally changed.
So some retirees end up carrying coverage for years that's solving problems they no longer actually have.
Yes, and that's a quiet financial leak that can persist for years without anyone noticing. Disability insurance is often the clearest example. Once you've retired, there's no employment income to replace, so the coverage has essentially lost its core purpose. Certain life insurance policies may also become unnecessary if the surviving spouse is already financially secure without that income. But, and this is equally important, retirement also increases the importance of different types of protection. Umbrella liability coverage becomes more critical in retirement, not less, because retirees often have larger asset bases worth protecting from potential lawsuits. Long-term care planning becomes more important because a major healthcare event later in life can be extraordinarily expensive and can genuinely destabilize a retirement plan that was otherwise solid. So this upgrade isn't simply about cutting insurance and reducing premiums. It's about right-sizing your protection for where you actually are right now, what risks matter at this stage of life, and which coverage is protecting things that no longer need protecting. Every unnecessary premium is a quiet drain on the system, but every missing protection is a vulnerability. And retirees who review this intentionally tend to create a much cleaner, more efficient structure that actually fits their current life.
Okay, let's dive right into the 7th upgrade. What is it?
The next upgrade tends to get underestimated because it seems simple on the surface, but it quietly determines whether retirees are forced into bad investment decisions during some of the most stressful periods they'll face. I'm talking about your cash reserve. Retirement changes the role cash plays in a way most people haven't thought through. While you were working, the standard advice was pretty straightforward: 3 to 6 months of expenses in an accessible account. That's usually fine because another paycheck is coming. The system resets automatically. But retirement is different in a fundamental way. Now the portfolio is the engine supporting your entire life. And that means liquidity has to be thought about much more deliberately and strategically.
Because retirees no longer have future income arriving every month to reset the system when something unexpected comes up.
Right. And this is where a lot of retirees accidentally create real pressure on their investment portfolio without even realizing they're doing it. The first layer is still about protection, medical expenses, home repairs, unexpected family situations. Those things don't stop happening in retirement. You still need accessible funds for the unpredictable. But retirement introduces another challenge that becomes genuinely important, and that's sequence risk.
Walk me through what sequence risk actually means for someone who hasn't heard that term.
It's simpler than it sounds. Sequence risk is the danger of being forced to sell investments at exactly the wrong moment, like during a market downturn, just to cover your basic living expenses. Imagine you retire, and within the first year or two, the market drops meaningfully. If you don't have enough stable, accessible cash set aside, you may have to sell investments at depressed prices simply to pay bills. And those forced sales can permanently damage the long-term sustainability of your portfolio in ways that can't fully be recovered from. But retirees who have their cash structured properly create breathing room. They give their investments time to recover instead of being forced into liquidation during a stressful market period. That's the real purpose of retirement cash planning. It's not about maximizing returns on your savings account. It's about protecting the portfolio from short-term pressure. And there's another piece that tends to get overlooked. Known future expenses like a car replacement, a major trip, a home renovation, these often stay fully invested because retirees don't separate them out ahead of time. Then the expense arrives and investments have to be sold regardless of what the market is doing at that moment. That's why retirement cash planning should deliberately separate short-term known spending from long-term investment capital. Think of it as two distinct pools with two distinct jobs. One protects flexibility and covers near-term needs. The other sustains income for the long haul. When those two pools get blurred together without clear intention, retirees end up making investment decisions that are driven by lifestyle needs rather than investment logic. And that's completely backwards. Retirees who structure this intentionally tend to make dramatically calmer decisions throughout retirement because the portfolio can do its actual job, which is long-term growth and sustainability, without being interrupted every time something comes up. And something always comes up. Upgrade number 8 is your spending awareness. And this one genuinely surprises people when I bring it up because most retirees are confident they know what they spend. The thing is, usually they don't, at least not accurately. While you're working, spending inefficiencies are kind of hidden by consistent income. A paycheck arrives, bills get paid, lifestyle drifts gradually upward, and small leaks in spending rarely feel dangerous because more money is coming. The system covers it automatically. But retirement changes the emotional relationship with spending entirely. Now, every dollar leaving the portfolio is connected psychologically to a finite resource. And suddenly the details that never seem to matter very much start mattering a lot.
So most retirees enter retirement with estimated spending numbers rather than actual ones.
Exactly. And retirement plans built on estimated spending can quietly become very dangerous over time. Retirees tend to underestimate certain categories consistently. Healthcare costs in particular, home maintenance, travel once the freedom really sets in, family support that often grows as children face their own financial pressures, and they completely forget others. The lifestyle tends to shift after the excitement of retirement begins. Spending often increases in the early years before it naturally settles down. That's why I genuinely encourage retirees to track actual spending during the first several months of retirement, or better yet, to start tracking before they ever leave work. Not in an obsessive way, not with anxiety around every purchase, but intentionally with awareness. Because a retirement plan that's built around real numbers is fundamentally different from one built around assumptions.
You mentioned something earlier, rehearsing retirement. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, and I think it's honestly one of the most underrated things someone can do before they retire. The idea is simple. Before leaving work completely, you practice living on your projected retirement income. You track spending carefully for a few months. You simulate what withdrawals would actually look like. You see what your life genuinely costs when you're paying close attention. And what happens almost every time is that surprises emerge very quickly. Sometimes spending is lower than people expected, which is reassuring. But sometimes it's meaningfully higher and in categories they never anticipated. Either way, retirees walk away from that exercise with something genuinely valuable. Clarity, real clarity, based on real numbers. And clarity, which is knowing what your life actually costs, not what you think it costs. That's what reduces emotional decision-making later. Because most poor financial decisions in retirement don't come from not knowing about investments. They come from uncertainty, from not knowing whether the money's going to hold up, from fear. Retirees who know their actual spending number make calmer decisions throughout retirement because uncertainty isn't running the show anymore. They know their number, they built their plan around it, they trust it.
Thank you. I understand this better now. Could you please tell us the next upgrade we absolutely need to complete before we retire?
Of course. Upgrade number 9 is your Social Security strategy. And this is one where the standard approach most retirees take is genuinely too simplified for the complexity involved. The question most people are asking is, what age gives me the biggest monthly check? That's the frame almost everyone uses. And I get it, it makes intuitive sense. But that question misses most of what actually matters. Because Social Security doesn't exist in isolation from the rest of your retirement. It interacts with almost everything else in the system.
So the claiming decision affects far more than just the size of the monthly payment.
It really does. The timing of when you claim affects your taxes because Social Security income interacts with your other income sources to determine how much of it becomes taxable. It affects your Roth conversion opportunities because higher Social Security income can close the low income window you need for conversions to make sense. It affects Medicare premium exposure through something called IRMA, which is an income-based surcharge on Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. And it has major implications for a surviving spouse later. So retirees who are only optimizing for the visible monthly number are often optimizing for the wrong thing entirely. They're making the claiming decision in isolation while ignoring the ripple effects on everything else in the system. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. Someone delays Social Security to 70 because they've heard it produces the largest benefit. That's often a perfectly valid choice. But if they're doing significant Roth conversions during those years between 62 and 70, adding large Social Security income on top of that can push them into a higher bracket than they anticipated. The conversion that looks smart in the planning spreadsheet suddenly costs more in taxes than it saves because the two decisions, Social Security timing and Roth conversions, weren't modeled together. Now, to be fair, there's no single universally correct answer on Social Security timing. Sometimes delaying creates significantly better long-term flexibility and lifetime income. Sometimes claiming earlier fits better depending on your health, your withdrawal strategy, and your overall income picture. But the point is that the decision needs to be made as part of the whole system, not treated as a completely separate calculation that gets made on its own.
A lot of retirees are genuinely surprised when they realize Social Security can actually be taxable income. That catches people off guard.
It catches almost everyone off guard. And once again, it comes back to how income is structured. The way retirees organize their withdrawals, which accounts, how much, in what order, directly affects the provisional income calculation that determines how much of Social Security gets taxed. So the interaction between withdrawal strategy and Social Security is real and it's significant. Retirees who coordinate these systems carefully and intentionally often preserve much more of their Social Security benefit from taxation over time, while retirees who claimed at a convenient age, or claim because a family member told them to, or claim because they thought it was safer to get the money early, they often don't even realize a more efficient structure existed. They simply live with the financial outcome they accidentally created, and they never know what they gave up.
Well, we are approaching the end of this podcast. Can you tell us the final major upgrade we must make before retirement?
Upgrade number 10 is your survivor plan. And I want to be honest, this one bothers me a little. Not because it's complicated, but because of how consistently it gets avoided. Most couples, when they think about this at all, land somewhere around the surviving spouse will probably be fine, the house is paid off, there are investments, one Social Security check will continue, the financial structure will basically stay intact. And that assumption, while completely understandable emotionally, doesn't match the math, because retirement often becomes more difficult financially after one spouse passes away, not easier.
Because the tax picture changes dramatically when you go from filing jointly to filing single.
Dramatically. And most couples never actually sit down and model this before it happens, which means the first time they understand the full impact is when they're grieving. When two people are alive and filing jointly, the tax brackets are wider, there's more room before you hit higher rates. But once one spouse passes, the survivor often files as a single individual. And single filer brackets are compressed sharply. More income gets pushed into higher brackets. At the same time, required minimum distributions typically continue from large traditional retirement balances, the full amount, not reduced in any way. One Social Security income stream disappears, which means less income coming in. Medicare's IRMAA surcharges can hit earlier and harder because the income thresholds for single filers are lower. So the surviving spouse can end up in a situation that looks like this: less income than the couple had together, while simultaneously facing higher effective tax rates on what remains. And this can persist not just for a year or two, but for 15 to 20 years.
So a surviving spouse can quietly inherit a far harsher financial structure without ever having made a single bad decision.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so important to model this while both spouses are still here, while there's still time to do something about it. This is one of the clearest arguments for accelerating Roth conversions earlier in retirement while both spouses are alive and the tax brackets are still wider. Because after one spouse passes, that flexibility window often closes permanently. The opportunity to move money out of taxable traditional accounts at reasonable rates gets compressed into something much narrower and much more expensive. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying everyone needs to aggressively convert everything or that the math always points in one direction. Sometimes the solution is genuinely more painful than the problem. If that's the case, then maybe you don't act. But the one thing nobody should do is simply ignore it, because ignoring the math doesn't make the math disappear. It just means you're living inside a financial structure you never consciously chose. The retirees who model this early, who actually look at what happens to the surviving spouse in the worst case scenario, almost always create significantly more stability and protection for the person who'll be left behind. And that matters far more than most people realize until the moment it actually happens.
I'll be honest with you, I had never thought about any of this. Thank you so much for your advice.
Don't worry, you're certainly not alone. But there's a piece I really want to sit with for a moment. The timing of when you do these things matters almost as much as whether you do them at all. And here's why. The moment you tell people you've retired, life gets noisy, almost immediately. Trips start getting booked, families start showing up because suddenly you're available. Spending accelerates psychologically. The calendar fills up in ways you didn't expect. Old friends want to get together. The grandkids need babysitting. The neighbor wants to know if you can help with that project they've been putting off. And that quiet window, that early retirement period, when you actually have the mental space and freedom from external pressure to think clearly about important structural decisions, that window disappears faster than anyone anticipates. I've watched people retire for a long time, and the thing they almost universally say in retrospect is, "I don't know how I ever had time for work." And they mean it sincerely. Retirement gets genuinely busy very quickly, but it gets busy in ways that feel good and feel social, which makes it remarkably easy to keep pushing the structural financial work aside, because dinner with friends is more enjoyable than reviewing beneficiary designations. A day trip sounds better than sitting down to map out a 30-year withdrawal strategy. That's completely human. That's not a character flaw, it's just how it works. But those structural decisions don't become less important because they're being delayed. They actually become more consequential, because the longer you wait, the more financial habits have already calcified around incomplete planning. Each of these 10 upgrades requires something that's actually quite rare in modern life: clear thinking. unhurried, uninterrupted, calm, clear thinking. And these decisions, withdrawal, sequencing, lifetime tax strategy, healthcare structure, beneficiary designations, survivor planning, these are not decisions that go well when they're made under emotional momentum or time pressure or social obligation.
So in a real sense, retirement isn't won or lost during the celebration. It's won or lost in those quiet, structural decisions that happen before anyone even knows you've left.
That's it, exactly. And I think that's the insight most people are never given. The retirees who handle these upgrades early, before the noise begins, before the calendar fills up, before the social pressure kicks in, they don't just tend to preserve more money. They preserve more confidence, more flexibility, more genuine peace of mind about the decisions they'll face for the next 25 years. Because retirement isn't just the absence of work, it's the construction of a completely new financial operating system. And the stronger that system is at the very beginning, the calmer and more sustainable everything that follows tends to be. So if there's one thing to take from all of this, it's that the window matters. Use it before you tell anyone. Use it while the quiet still exists and the decisions can be made on your terms, because that window doesn't come back.
Thank you for coming, Mr. Buffett.
Thank you.